Welcome to Santana True Crime. Today we've got a special guest with us, author Bruce Mowday. He is the author of the book A Killer at the Door, which you can pick up at Amazon. I'm sure Barnes and Noble probably has as well. Bruce, where can we buy the book?
Yes, you can get it at Barnes and Noble and at Amazon. And if anybody wants a signed copy, they can always contact me. And my email is my last name, Mowday @mowday.com. It's generally available. And of course, the publisher, Schiffer Books, also has copies.
Great. That's actually a really good option to have a signed copy. And the cover looks really cool too.
They did a great job with the cover and the design. I was really happy with what the publisher did, and actually, I had a signing recently, and somebody looked at the cover, and they discovered if you look at between the A and the K in killing, there is a prisoner kind of climbing up, crab walking between the two letters, and that's exactly what the prisoner did.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, and I remember the case. The case is about Mr. Cavalcante, who is a Brazilianer who entered into the US illegally, and we're going to get into the details, but a quick summary would be that he murdered his girlfriend and then is staying at a local prison and breaks out. But let's start off with, why did you write this book?
Well, I've done a couple of other true crime books, and I started out like professionally as a newspaper reporter, and I covered the courts and for a number of years for the paper in Westchester, Pennsylvania, suburban Philadelphia. One of my bigger cases was the Johnston brothers murders. They were mass murderers. There was a movie, Acklish Range, with Sean Penn, Christopher Walken. And after the movie came out, I did look at what really happened. Of course, the movie was a Hollywood version of them. And then I also did a book on some of their gang members stole a number of paintings, 15 from the Andrew Wyeth estate. And of course, Wyeth paintings, if you got a spare $5-6 million, you might be able to get one. So I did a book on how they broke in, where the paintings went. It was true crime, how done it. And a few years ago, Schiffer Publishing, who did this book, asked me to do the 50th anniversary book on the murders of two Kennett Square policemen, titled Small Town Cops and the Crosshairs. And so I've been writing true crime for a while. And actually, as this escape took place, I had a number of people email me and tell me, you need to write this book. Actually, at first, I wasn't sure if I was going to, because I thought, it was a guy who escaped, after he's captured. 2 months later, nobody will know his name. But as it developed and the crab walking video became public, and I was urged, and especially to do a story focused on the community and the effects besides the escape and the criminal and the capture. And as you said, it received a lot of publicity, not only nationally, but internationally. It just seemed like, yep, the book was sitting right in front of me. It's a good story. I had many different layers as I went into the story, and it was a natural to do.
Can you describe the area of Chester County?
Sure. Suburban Philadelphia, we're about 30 miles west of Philadelphia, and it's a large county, and there's several different sections of it. If you're in the extreme east, and that's not where the escape took place, you're in the mainline Philadelphia, the commuting in, but in the area where the prison's located, and that's Pocopson Township, it's very much rural. Horse country, a lot of horse events out there. This took place around Longwood Gardens. It's a DuPont Gardens that is just spectacular, world renowned. So you go from the suburban to pretty much the country pretty quickly. It's an area, when the escape took place, it was the last of August, beginning of September, and it fully grown. There's a lot of underbrush. It's rolling hills. It's a place where somebody could hide if they knew what they were doing.
So Chester County Prison, a lot of the community was under the impression that only non-violent offenders were being housed there. I guess they didn't take into consideration that if you are not um, adjudicated guilty, then you can still be housed in a local prison. And there's a lot of staff issues as well. Can we talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, I was kind of surprised, and really, I shouldn't have been surprised that the community really didn't know there was more than drunk drivers. And I had a number of people, including some people in the cops and local government, that thought they were under the impression it was a nonviolent prison. But I knew maybe because I was a newspaper reporter that when they brought in rapists and murderers, they were housed at Chester County Prison. So most of the time there were violent prisoners in that prison. It wasn't unusual, and I don't think anybody in the government really also thought second thoughts about it or informing the public. But if you're just moving into the area or it seems nice and calm, and somebody tells you it's only the nonviolent people, maybe that's why they had that impression. As for the staffing issues, and as we speak today, I'm told that the staffing issues really remain, and this has been 18 months, going on 2 years after the escape. Being a prison guard is not easy. The pay is not great. The conditions are not great. You can imagine putting up with criminals, but besides the criminals, you also had a lot of the inmates were having mental health issues, would present a whole different types of problems for the guards. Coming off of COVID, a number of the prison guard or the correctional officers, left. They became understaffed. It became chronic understaffing, and they couldn't hire enough people. Still can't hire enough people to fill all the positions. So what the administration had to do was to do the best they could, because they were still receiving prisoners from the county courthouse, and they kind of stressed their staff way too thin, and that gave the opportunity for Cavalcante to escape.
Yeah, I thought that when I was reading about that, it reminded me of your friend Carla Conti, her book Chainbirds, when they were talking about the issues that that federal prisons were having with staffing issues, and it's really just not a great place to work. Um, I know that from what you're saying too, that the jail was really behind the times in technology. I believe one person said that it was like something from the 1980s and they were decades behind. And so in February, the National Institute for Jail Operations is hired, but to conduct training as well as to do a comprehensive evaluation. But prior to that was the escape, correct?
There had been they've had a little issues. They weren't known to be a place where there was a lot of escapes, but the county government.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I was referring to the escape of Igor Bolts.
Bolt, yeah, no. Actually, they did the investigation even before the Bolt escape. The county commissioners, and they're the ones that really run the county prison, are responsible for it. And there's a prison board, and all the commissioners are on it. They started to get complaints about the lax enforcement of rules and how the prison was being run by the then warden Phillips. And Phillips did not take kindly. He said, I've been out here at this prison for decades. I haven't been any problems, let me alone. But his management style was pretty much, from what I understand, and a lot of people told me the same thing, pretty much kind of hands off, wasn't forceful, just allowed things to progress as they had been. And for a number of years, it was okay. And as you stated, the prison was neglected for the updates on communications and enhanced security. And it all came together when they kept having decreasing number of guards there, the correctional officers, that just really kind of fed into it. But when the county commissioners started to get numerous complaints about the leadership, that's when they brought in the national organization, and they spent a little bit of money, not much, to do the study. And the study came up with the recommendations that it was pretty lax out there. But that was before the Bolt escape and also the Cavalcante escape.
Yeah, so that's even more interesting. So they're hired to do the evaluation essentially, and then they have an escape. Can you tell me about Igor's escape?
Yeah, Igor, was a local guy, and he had once walked away from the kind of work release out there, and they put him in prison, and they wanted to get back out again. And unlike the Cavalcante, and when he scaled the wall, and again he did the crab walking, was pretty unusual coming up through the walls. One of the guards saw him, and even though he got outside the prison, he was recaptured fairly quickly. And the prison decided, not, which was amazing, not to secure the place where he escaped from. And also, they didn't inform anybody in the public. So people didn't know there was a problem, and they didn't do anything to solve the one problem where a prisoner had escaped.
Yeah, that's what amazed me too, just the neglect of that the prisoners found, an easy point of access to be able to get out. Not that crab walking up a wall is easy, but when you're determined and you're able to find a soft spot, and then you take advantage of it. And I'm sure that word got out in the prison that that's how he escaped, but yet they only fixed that area by adding a little bit of barbed wire, right?
Absolutely, just a little bit. And you're right. Somebody mentioned, I have in the book, that there's no secrets in a prison, and that Bolt escape was very well known throughout the prison. Cavalcante knew about it. And you're talking about somebody with motivation. He was about ready to go to prison for life in
Right.
Pennsylvania, so he really had nothing to lose. He had escaped before, and even from his home country in Brazil, where he still has a pending murder charge there. So he was up for anything that he could do.
Well, let's jump to Cavalcante, and can you tell me about the incident that happened in Brazil that led to his murder, or to the murder that he committed?
Yeah, when I looked into the background as much as I could, he grew up pretty poor, broken family. A story that we've heard before, and it almost always leads to no good. That he was involved in drugs and gangs, and one day his friend, and the murder victim was described as a friend. He had an argument over how a car was fixed or the price for the fixed, and they were outside a restaurant that they both had frequented before, and he pulled out a gun and shot him and killed him. Um, Cavalcante immediately fled, actually went out into the Brazilian jungles a little bit, and when he realized, or somebody told him that, hey, look, they're not looking for you that hard, and indeed the local prosecutor and police did not put in the arrest warrant into their national system until months later. It gave him time to get to an airport and fly to Puerto Rico. So it was pretty lax searches on the Brazilians' part, and a little bit of cunning, and Cavalcante knowing the ropes. And this is where he gained some of his experience that he used, I'm sure, in Chester County when he escaped from the prison here. But he knew what he was doing. He knew how to escape, and he already fled that one murder charge in Brazil. And when he got to Puerto Rico, and this is from the U.S. Marshals, they said that he secured a driver's license, a U.S. driver's license, of course, illegally under an assumed name, and found his way to New York Harbor. And I'm not sure of the ship, and the marshals didn't tell me, but they said they're pretty sure that He hopped a ship from Puerto Rico, made it to New York Harbor, got off of it at New York Harbor, and then made his way south and west to where his sister was living in an extreme northern part of Chester County. So that's how he got here. You know, bad background, murder of a friend, impulse, and from what we've been told about him is that impulse problems, drinking problems, drugs problems at a time, and with his girlfriend, insanely jealous. So that you had somebody with a lot of issues, emotional issues, control issues, coming here illegally, and nobody really knowing about it.
Okay, so he arrives in Pennsylvania, and it seems like there's a pretty good amount of Brazilians that live in the area but he meets Deborah and they start dating. And at first, he's kind to her. And then some domestic violence starts to happen. She gets a restraining order against him. And then, can you tell us about the murder of Deborah?
Sure, Deborah Brandino, and a lot of this comes from her sister, and actually she's the one that's raising the two kids at the moment. But said he came in, he was working as a laborer, like doing carpentry, floor covering, you know, getting paid under the table and kind of subsisting. He was known within that Brazilian community, and Chester County has a lot of little communities. There's a Indian from India community near where I live in the area. Of course, also the area is known for its mushrooms, and there's a lot of Hispanic, Mexican families have now owned companies there, but they have their own communities. So the county has some of those types of where a different national dominates the area. He goes. At first, relationships seemed just fine. And as you said, the jealousy came in from the drinking and accused Deborah Brandino of running around on him. And the Chester County DA assured me that was not true. It was just Cavalcante's mind. The domestic violence started. There was a petition filed to keep him away. And when he heard that, because he knew he didn't want to get caught and anybody to look into his background and find that murder charge in Brazil, he took off and he actually fled to Pittsburgh across the state, and where there's some other Brazilians, and he stayed with them for a while until he thought it was safe to return, and he did. And after he returned, his girlfriend was, of course, afraid of him, and somehow she found out about that murder charge and let it be known that the next day she was going to go to the police and inform the police. And Cavalcante thought he could not in any way allow that to happen. And he drove to her where she was living. She was outside, her two young children were outside, and he confronted her and took out a knife and stabbed her multiple times in front of her children. It's just a brutal, horrific thing to do, and then fled. And he did this all just because he didn't want that other murder charge to be uncovered, but it's just a horrific killing.
And he's captured fairly quickly after this. And there's a lot of detail about this and about his life. And again, the killer at the door, you've got to go get it. I'm not going to read you the whole book, but go get you a copy. And I think that's really cool that you'll actually sign a copy for people too. So a trial happens and he tries to plead. Well, he pleads responsible, right? But he's trying to get like a lesser degree charge and trying to say it was more like manslaughter.
Yeah, the defense was not that he didn't do it because people saw him, but yeah, he was doing loss of control, lesser culpability, not a straight guilty, not a real intentional, but, he went there with a knife. And just 2 days ago, I had a book signing, and one of the jurors from the trials turned up at the book signing. I had a chance to talk with him. And he was saying there was no doubt he was guilty. First degree was right there. And even though he was an alternate juror, he said that the jury came back fairly quickly with a verdict and could have come back even quicker, but they decided they should sit around for a half hour just to make sure it looked like they were really deliberating. But it was very, very crystal clear that he was indeed guilty. It was premeditated, and they didn't buy any of that. I snapped, and I didn't mean it. Defense that was given by him, and was quickly convicted. And within a couple of weeks, the Judge Patrick Carmody, good good judge, he was a former prosecutor. I saw him try some cases, sentencing to life, and had a pretty telling uh, exchange with Cavalcante during the sentencing. He gave Cavalcante a chance to apologize or say something to the family of the murder victim, and he did not take advantage of it. And if I remember, the judge said, he basically said, "I'm sorry," and pretty much just those words. Then the judge had some pretty harsh words for Cavalcante, even calling him a little man in Portuguese.
Yeah, I
Which,
thought that was really
yeah,
unique. That the judge could pull that off in Portuguese, and Cavalcante is 5 feet tall and about 120 pounds, so he's not a big guy. So
yeah,
does the trial not get a lot of attention as far as in the local community around the jail? And I'm assuming that they did not have a clue that he was actually being housed at the Chester County Prison.
yeah, really good. And these are other layers that kind of came into my book. Um, for the most part, people did not know who Cavalcante was until he escaped. Chester County has over 500,000 people. It's like four separate counties, really. The murders took place in northern Phoenixville, and the people way down south in Oxford have no interest in what's going on there, and the same for like Ackland way to the west or the main line in the east. So it's not like everybody in the county kind of hangs on what's happening in the whole county. And what has really hurt not only the coverage but also in general is the breakdown of the local media. I said I worked for a newspaper, and my last position was managing editor. And for at that point we had a little bit less than 500,000 people, but I had 25 full-time reporters and 50 part-time reporters. We would have had a lot of information. Circulation would have penetrated the county, but with newspapers really falling apart, um, the local coverage on anything from taxes to government to what's happening in the courthouse is minimal at best. The trial was covered, but you had few people reading the newspapers. The online you have to charge for, and there's not much content there even to pay it online. So there was not that penetration of what happened. The trial, it was out there. It was a lot of people just oblivious to crime. Also, Chester County, for the most part, is a very, very safe place. They have the crime, and it's there in certain pockets, but in certain sections, especially in horse country, they kind of ignore what's going on. So they did not have, most people did not have an awareness of who Cavalcante was and the crime that he had committed.
So let's go to the day of the actual escape. So you've got Cavalcante in this, small kind of, I would describe it as like a minimum security prison, really. And
Yeah, he's a county. It's a county. It's
yeah,
the state prisons are the ones that are a lot more secure.
So he's got nothing to lose, and he also has the murder charge in Brazil. In that day, he's given access to the rec yard, and he's also wearing a white T-shirt and gray uh, shorts and white tennis shoes, I believe. So he doesn't really look like a prisoner that people think of wearing complete orange jumpsuits or striped orange jumpsuits. I think that'd be something that if you saw someone, walking around and they're wearing a white t-shirt and gray shorts, you probably wouldn't think anything of it, which plays to his advantage. But in that particular day, he goes to the same spot where Igor escaped and does the crab walk. Can you take it from there?
Sure. Just back up a couple minutes. I talked with a correctional officer who used to work there and also was a member of the sheriff's office, so he had a lot of experience. He said when he was a correctional officer, when they had more staff, somebody, a criminal like Cavalcante, a convicted murderer, somebody should be a max, they always had a guard with him every place he went when he was out of his jail cell. And also when they went to the exercise yard, and every prisoner is mandated to have at least an hour of exercise a day, they would have guards on the ground in the yard and also up on the tower watching them. But this day, because of the staff shortage, they had a guard escort Cavalcante and the others out to the exercise yard and left. So that's one that's not there. They had no guards on the exercise yard at all, so there was no surveillance there. As you mentioned, the area where Bolt had escaped, they had no people there and very minimal, just some wires on top to stop it. And Cavalcante knew all this, knew the area when he came out. And when he did, very soon after coming out, and he had a towel. Usually prisoners don't take a towel, but it's not unusual. And it was a really hot day. This was a hot time of year. It was a really heat wave going on, and some of them were playing basketball. So you would assume the towel that they could use the towel off. It's going to be hot. They're going to perspire. That's not unusual. And so that's how he kind of came out into the yard. And there was the one guard who was on the tower was on his telephone playing games or talking. That was a violation of the rule. They should not have, this guard should not have been up there with the phone. He should have been watching the prisoners, and he was basically the last one left to watch them. So the prisoners were pretty much unwatched. And this goes to, even though they had cameras on that area, and this is what really set off a lot of the national publicity, that he was caught on camera, caught crab walking up and out of the prison, but they didn't have enough guards to monitor the camera. So nobody saw it until they went to look at it hours later. The cameras caught one other prisoner acting what looks like an out somebody to look out for him, to look out. But when they talked with him, he said, "No, I didn't see him go. I was just watching the basketball game." But just from his position and everything, he was probably giving Cavalcante a little assistance to get out. But he's out there, basically nobody watching him, and knew where the previous prisoner escaped, and out he went.
So he gets out, and they do have a siren that they test every week, right?
Yes.
But people, they don't have a very good communication system to get the word out that a prisoner has escaped. Or do you think it's more of they don't want to? I don't know if that was just not their focus, or do you think that they were trying to minimize the impact and not alert everyone, thinking that they would be able to, capture him quickly before the public finds out?
They're all good questions, and they're all part of another layer. I don't think they really thought about alerting the public, even though there was all these criminals out there that some of them were violent, that they, just because they always did every Saturday morning for a minute, they would do the siren. And of course, there's a lot of people in that area, and some of them can't hear the siren on a good day. They run it for a minute, and it becomes kind of, you just hear it, and you don't pay much attention to it. And on this day, they sounded the siren for a minute. And I think a lot of people, A, didn't hear it, couldn't hear it, didn't pay any attention to it, sounded like it was just something kind of normal. And they didn't run it for any more than 1 minute. You would think that they had a siren with with an escape with a murderer, that they would run it for 5 or 10 minutes or something and really alert the public. But that 1 minute did not do it. They were certainly hoping that they would catch him as soon as they could and would minimize the publicity on it. But after several hours, and what happened, and I think it's also interesting that on that day was the prison warden's first day on the job.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. I mean, what a way to start your first day. You've got a prison escape, and yeah,
Yeah, when I talked with Warden Hollins, he said, you know, I was in there. It was my first day. You're settling in with a cup of coffee, and one of his staff comes in and say, "Oh, by the way, we've got an escapee." His first reaction would have been mine. Yeah, yeah, quit joking around.
right.
Yeah, but they quickly said, "No, no, we got a prison escapee," and it took him about an hour to first realize that Cavalcante was gone, because they didn't check him until counting the prisoners coming back in from the exercise yard, and they found out that one was missing. So they recounted again, and they alerted the warden, and then the warden said, "Well, let's make sure he's not hiding someplace in the prison, so we'll check again." So it was about 2 hours even before they called the county and the Chester County detectives that were lead investigators early on about it, and they started coming out. And that's when they started to notify the citizen. And the DA, Deb Ryan, came out about noon and assured everybody that everybody within a 3-mile radius had been alerted to this escape. Well, that wasn't true. She was basing that statement on the county emergency notification system. And the flaw was there, that if you didn't sign up for this notification, you were never told about the escape or anything else. And frankly, not that many people had signed up for it. So they sent out alerts to some people, and I'm told some people never got it, the alert that even had signed up for it. And those first 2 hours were really crucial. As you mentioned, he was just another civilian out walking around. The area was isolated enough that you had occasional people walking around, but not a lot of people. And one of the residents did see him walking, but again, he did not have an orange jumpsuit. There was nothing to identify him as a prisoner. Now that has all changed, and they now make everybody wear the orange jumpsuits. I interviewed this one young mother who lives, you can see the prison from her house, and there's an exercise path that the township maintains around the prison, and a lot of people use it to walk kids, dogs, exercise, run. And one of the entrances is right by this young woman's home, and she had just dropped off her oldest child to daycare and had the young baby, and she was on maternity leave, and she was out doing a little gardening and had the child just inside the house where she could see him. But pretty sure at Cavalcante walked right past her. You almost have to. So you all of a sudden had just the opportunity for disaster coming up. And she didn't know it to a couple hours later when her daycare called. And so the notification of the residents was really poor. They called the prison called the local elementary school. But what they told him at first was that, hey, we've had an escape. Don't worry about it. We're on it. Not that it was a murderer. Not that, that, of course, they weren't really on
Don't
it.
worry about the escape murder. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just we've got an escape.
And
We're
these
on it.
schools, they don't have school resource officers or any type of law enforcement at the school, correct?
Most of them don't. Like it's not like an inner city school or a school where there's a lot of issues. Some of them will have security officers on it. I know some of the high schools do, especially in different one, but it's not like you walk in through metal detectors or anything. Luckily, the principal thought it was strange and called the superintendent's office and got a hold of the superintendent who was in Harrisburg, and he gave me a really good interview. And he said, as soon as that came up, they locked everything down. But at first, before they knew what was going on, this was the beginning of the school year, and they had kids out outside the classes and outside the building on fire drills just to make sure everything worked. And parents were, basically yelling at him, how dare you let my child out with escaped murderer running around? Well, they brought everybody in as soon as they knew that, and when the kids were out, they were not aware of what was going on. So that whole um, identification process, the notification process, was just awful for the community, and most of them got it through social media. Through there was a township Facebook page, and the woman who runs it does a really good job, and she doesn't put rumors up there, and she wouldn't post the first couple things until she checked them out. And I think I called her in the book the Paul Revere of the cops in township, because I think more people learned of the escape through her than anything else. And she was pretty good at keeping rumors off and updating the public, and that was the way many of them heard about it. I talked with one resident who was teaching actually in the neighboring state of Maryland, and she heard it from a parent who said, "Oh, there's an escaped murderer right in your backyard," when she got it. So it was hit and miss, especially until the first press conference. I'm still not sure how many people heard it off the bat. So it took a while for everybody to be notified of what's going on.
So let's go ahead and jump to the state police is called in, obviously, because they need a larger agency to run it. And it sounds like before that, things are not really well organized, as well as they don't have the resources. You mentioned that the things like canines had been depleted, and as well as staff overall in the county. And Lieutenant Colonel, is it Bivens?
Bivens, yes.
Okay. Yeah, he takes command, and things start to change for the better.
Yeah, and you're right. Right at the beginning, they didn't have the staff. It was a holiday weekend. It even took to the next Monday. They skipped on Friday, and it took to the next Monday before the state police really could give up a lot more resources into it. And they called in a lot of federals and U.S. Marshals were pretty much called in right away, and they're very good at hunting down escapees. But one person told me it was like they were hoping that he would turn himself in, or somebody would step on him and they would bring him in. There wasn't any really clear way that they were organizing their search, and that pretty much was the beginning of it. And they didn't have a way to feed the troopers or early on, and the local fire company, along with fire company, I talked with Chief McCarthy. He said that he was alerted and asked to have one of his ambulances, and they only had several for the whole township. So that put a strain on his working and protecting the rest of the public. And he used one of them and some of the equipment to run to the local Wawa store and Walmart to get the food to bring them back. So all of a sudden, the strain on a lot of other things were taking place. And the DA, Deborah Island, knew that they needed a better organization. And she said she talked with some of her colleagues around the state, and they all said, "Call Bivens. You need Bivens in here." And Bivens has done several major searches, and he's a really steady guy. And a lot of people in the public liked him. He was the face of the press conferences and giving out the information. And he was adamant, "We're going to get him. It might be tomorrow, it might be next week, it might be a couple of months, but we'll get him." And he had his system in place. And as you can imagine, they needed a system because all the rumors that were coming in, where he was and what he was doing, and he was spotted in Wilmington, he was spotted in Westchester, and both those communities are miles and miles away, which he never was. And you didn't want to use your resources to be running all over the place if nobody was there or if they were just false rumors. And one of the big parts of the investigation and how they searched for him, they used what they call proof of life sightings. And this was when they were absolutely sure they knew where Cavalcante was at what point. And where they got the most information on this was from cameras and ring doorbell cameras and cameras from Longwood, trail cameras from Longwood Gardens, that even though it was delayed, that information getting to the police sometimes 12 hours or more, at least they knew at a certain point in time they had a photograph of Cavalcante, and they moved their search perimeters and tightened them up with each sighting to try to track him down. They got tremendous, I mean, hundreds of police officers at times were there from all over the state, federal agencies, the Border Patrol, the canines. You mentioned the canines. The administration before Sheriff Carolyn Welsh loved the canines, had a really like 9 or 10, I forget the exact number, of dogs that were trained in sniffing out bombs and sniffing out cadavers and just whatever dogs can do. But the current administration, some political issues with Sheriff Welsh, and they just dismantled the canines. And I had more than one person tell me if they had that full complement, he probably would have been caught that day. But the longer you go, they did get some of the canine in later, but the scent's now gone and makes it doubly difficult to find him. So all of that was going against them. And Cavalcante used his experience of being in the jungles and knew how to hide during the day and move at night and go find fresh water and streams. And this place also had a lot of farms and gardens, so you got some fresh vegetables besides breaking into several houses. So the longer they went, even though they were more organized and more people, it was still very, very difficult to find him. And the police came in for a lot of criticism. They said, what's taking so long to find this little guy from Brazil? And the terrain was not easy. Like I said, a lot of things were overgrown. You had to get in and get under bushes. Some of them you couldn't see, a foot in front of your face. With some of them, the police were telling me. Also, I mentioned it was very, very hot, and a lot of these searchers had 70 pounds of equipment on their back. So think about being hot, 70 pounds, and crawling on the ground, and you had the bees and the insects. It was not an easy place to search. Some people said, "Well, why don't you just make a circle and walk in and you'll get him?" But the search area, you need 30 or 40,000 people to do that. They were getting a lot of suggestions that maybe have been well meant, but it was just impossible to do.
Yeah, the conditions were, I don't think people really can imagine how thick the brush was. And we know after the fact that at one point he was almost stepped on by one of the searchers. And, guys described even using their weapon mounted lights and flashlights to have to see under some of the brush in the daytime, which I thought was incredible. And it's really hot, like you mentioned. So the effect on the community, I'm seeing some mixed responses. You've got some people that are having like PTSD symptoms, And then you've got others that are bringing out their lawn chairs and watching law enforcement, you know, search bushes. You actually compared it to the first Civil War battle.
Yes, yeah, and again, like I said, different layers and just the community responses. One of the reasons that really kind of solidified that I needed to do the book. I had two calls from therapists said, the community the issue, but then I had a call from a grandfather who said, and this was a couple weeks after they captured him, said, you need to talk to my daughter. My grandson is having just emotional trauma every time he hears a helicopter. Just because they had helicopters up for 2 straight weeks over their heads, you can imagine where it would do to a young person, also to older people. I had an adult said, he flinches when he hears a helicopter. It does make that impression on you. People were scared. Cavalcante had broken into several homes during his out. They couldn't get to work. The police had roads barricaded. There's this one poor guy who owned the new gas station, or he was the new owner, and it was shut down for 2 weeks because he was right in the middle of the investigation, and they weren't allowing anybody there. You had all of this going on, and for the most part, people really did support the police. I mean, they gave them water and food, and so much they told them to cut it off at one point. But the community, but then there were these other people, other parts of the community. You had some people rooting for Cavalcante to keep running, and I think they were looking at, oh, here's this small Brazilian out there, and the police can't catch him. And when I talked to those people, and then I reminded them on the brutal murder, they got very quiet. And someone said, "Oh well, we didn't really take that into account." Some of the younger generation said it's just like ninja warriors, this crab walking up to get out. So that's what caught their idea and their imagination. There was also several rewards offered for Cavalcante's capture. I'm still not sure if they were really a good idea because you had people out there looking to capture him to get the reward, and they would pack their rifles and into the woods they would go. This was really bad on several levels. A, you don't know the guy next to you how proficient he is with the rifle. You don't know if the police are going to take you for Cavalcante. And also it's not. You might think it's a little guy out there, but remember he's killed two people. He'll kill you if you get in his way. So I don't think a whole lot of people really thought through the whole idea. We'll just go out there and capture him. At one point, some of the locals thought they would get a vigilante group and they were all going to meet at a local hardware store and leave from there and go do it. But that was discouraged and never happened. As I said, the local media was not strong, so there wasn't that continuous updated of information. But some of the social media people went and did coverage, and some of them, you could tell they were not reporters from the stuff that they were telling the public. And police said that they did more harm than good by doing that. And they would kind of listen in and find out maybe where the next search was taking place. And they would announce it, and people would come and look. I talked with people at one retirement community, and they said they could observe the wood line where there's a search, and people came up and parked their cars and got out their lawn chairs and their drinks and sat and watched. And they had their children with them. And what were they thinking of? They bring their children to see maybe somebody get shot and killed. I don't think that was a great idea either. So you had all this community reaction that you went from really good, from supporting the police or trying to help, and to the ones that were really just kind of getting in the way. Interesting community dynamics and human interest. And I did compare it to the Civil War battle, the first battle of Bull Run, where some of the people from DC went out to the first big battle, and took their carriages and their picnics, and it was actually called the Picnic Battle. And after the Southerners routed the Northerners, they retreated very quickly back into D.C. And there was one congressman was captured and spent time in a Southern prison. So, this the what they did here in the Cavalcante search was not really different. It's been happening for a long time. Just how people react to these types of really sad incidents and scary incidents.
Yeah, that was really interesting, and you've got a lot of different perspectives in the book, which again, you need to go buy A Killer at the Door. So during the second week, Bivens makes a statement. He said, "We chased people for a lot longer than this and ultimately brought them to justice. As I've said before, we're not going anywhere. We will eventually capture him, and we will." Sorry, I screwed that up. Let me try that again. We will eventually capture him, and when we do, he's going to jail. And about that time, shortly after that time, the suspect then breaks a perimeter. And again, there's a lot of detail in this book about this first week where we pretty much learn that he's still laying around a mile or so from the actual prison. So he hasn't made a lot of traction, but he's very good in the woods. He kind of knows what he's doing as a criminal. And we find that he breaks the perimeter and he finds a van at the dairy farm. If you want to tell us about that part of the story where he breaks the perimeter and finds this van.
Sure. The police and Bivens, everybody was saying, lock your homes, lock your doors. He's going to try to get a vehicle to escape. And I've had more than one people say that every time a family member went out to work or something and came home, they were greeted by another family member with a gun in the driveway because they figured that was the time that he was going to try to carjack somebody to get a vehicle to get away. He didn't go very far. He didn't really have any outside help, and he didn't really know the area. So that was probably several of the reasons why he didn't get too far at first. But the Saturday that he did break the perimeter, he was on a hill overlooking Bailey's dairy farm. I talked with the owners, and the owner they're still chagrined about what happened. They told me early on in the escape, which they're pretty close to the prison. The dairy was searched. They cooperated fully. They have a lot of vehicles there. They have a dairy delivery one, and they were working. And the owner told me that she was pretty much told, "Don't worry about him." They had him pretty well centered in a different area of the search zone, and they let down their guard. And while they were still finishing up for the day, I'm sure Cavalcante was across the street in the woods watching, and he saw his chance and made his way and found a dairy truck, that refrigerated one that had the keys in it, and got in and took off. When they talk about perimeters, there's a lot of mileage to really watch. And if you're clever, you can cross roads and probably find a way out of the area. And that's what Cavalcante did this week, that night. And one of the U.S. Marshals told me that they were actually very pleased when he got in a truck and got away, because it was a lot easier to track him on the move than in the underbrush. And that's indeed exactly what happened.
Yeah, and he actually steals a newer van, a passenger van, and he takes it to, is it Phoenixville?
Phoenixville area, it was it's close to the area where his sister was living and where he had stayed and he had done some work. So he was going back. He said he was, he didn't want to go to his sister's because he was sure that the police were watching her, and he was absolutely correct. And they actually could have arrested her for some visa issues, which were later found out they worked it all out. But as soon as he broke that perimeter, they went and took her into custody, so she couldn't help him. But he was going back trying to get some help. Went to this one person he knew, rang the doorbell, and that's part of that cover. The killer at your door, and they were the photographs from the ring camera that he was the night that he broke the perimeter, looking for help. And the owner of the home was at a restaurant with other family members, and when the photograph came through, he turned to his wife and said, "I'm not quite sure who this is," and she indeed identified him as Cavalcante. And they alerted police. I think the local police. And I think the response was pretty amazing. They said, "Go home and keep him there till we get there." And the homeowner says, "You go there first, and I'll come later. I'm not going to go to Tina."
Yeah, I thought that was a really unique way to do that. Why don't you go to the murder and yeah,
Uh,
I thought that was really strange too.
there's
But
lots of
so
this.
now they're actually looking for a van, which is like you're saying, a lot easier to find. They've got LPRs and equipment that are reading license plates, and they find the van, and it still has gas in it. So we can assume that I don't know if he's listening to the radio or what, but he knows that people are looking for that van. I'm assuming,
I
and
think we actually dumped it before that came. Um,
he
they,
dumped it
I'm
before
sure we
when.
were going to look for it at some point, but it was identified a little bit. The state police knew where the van came from the license plate readers, as you indicated, before the owners knew it was stolen. They went early in the morning and knocked on the door and came out, and sure enough, the one van was stolen. And through those license plate readers, they figured out pretty much what routes they were on, and they found the abandoned van pretty quickly through that. It was amazing what they did, and they once he was out in the open a little bit.
So they start shifting their resources, and it's still a wooded area where he's at. And then I thought this was a really interesting story. Can you tell us about when he gets a hold of the 22 rifle?
The varmint rifle, yes, he was, and that kind of changed the whole tone of the search. They didn't know he had stolen a knife early on and thought he was totally unarmed. But as soon as he had the varmint rifle in his possession, they knew he was dangerous, and the whole investigation took on a different tone, including they were saying, you know, what should we do? Should we, shoot to kill if he confronts us, which I'm sure they probably would, but they really would not rather have done that because they didn't want the next escapee to think that they had to battle it out with police, that they were going to capture him, put him in jail forever. So there's a little bit of that going on, but he's out one night. It was a Sunday night. He comes across this garage where the owner is in doing some welding work. He had put his varmint rifle and with a flashlight at the end of his workbench, and he did that because he was going to take it into the house to escort his partner in after work another hour. But Cavalcante saw the rifle at the end of the workbench, ran in and grabbed it. The owner saw what was happening, told him not to do it, chased him out the door. He had a little pistol with him, took a couple shots, missed Cavalcante, and off he went. But again, that's another proof, a life sighting, and it's getting closer to the capture at that point. He also had gotten different footwear and a Philadelphia Eagles sweatshirt that he put on. And again, they were closing in that area. Everything, all the fears from the southern part of the county shifted to the northern part of the county for several days after he escaped.
So now he's got a rifle. They know the area that he's in. They're setting up the perimeter again, and a plane actually spots someone that they believe is him. They know it's not a deer. That was on September 13th. but a storm comes in and they keep their perimeter set up. Um, can you tell us about what happened with that capture?
Yeah, yeah, they had planes up, besides the helicopters, they had planes up just constantly. They had the infrared technology, and what I learned was that infrared does not penetrate canopies. So if you had thick cover of trees and leaves and stuff, they couldn't detect somebody down there. But they caught Cavalcante in the field, and just as a violent rainstorm came in, they couldn't keep the plane up. But the plane, of course, told the ground forces where they were spotted. So the police went out, they were on duty, and just did a circle around him and hunkered down during the rainstorm and all night. And the next morning, when the plane got up, they spotted him again, said he was still there. So they closed in on him, surprised him. He when he saw that he's being surrounded, he reached for that varmint rifle, and that's when they unloosed a canine Yoda, who was a border patrol canine. And Yoda did his job, went in there and grabbed Cavalcante by the head. Not seriously injured him, but he was trained. Yoda was trained to do so, and they dragged him out and put him into custody. There was no other resistance at all. Cavalcante said, I wouldn't have shot the police anyway. I had a chance to do that, but I haven't found a police officer really believed that statement at all."
Yeah, I love the quote that you had in there where it said, "I think he was in pain at that point."
Yes.
I've seen lots of canine bites in my career, and every one of them have screamed bloody murder because they are in pain.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I thought that was really cool that Yoda got to be the hero in this, or at least one of the heroes in this story. And so he's finally captured and taken back to prison. Can we talk about what changes happened at the prison, if any, after this escape?
The community really demanded changes. They wanted to know what happened and how they were going to be protected in the future. And there were several big meetings held, community meetings held, where county government officials went in, and they immediately draw up plans on how to uh, correct the situations, and they spent a lot of money. A lot of the money went for outside with higher walls and better security and more cameras, and they promised to hire more staff. But you had more cameras, but you need somebody to watch them, and that was part of the problems when he escaped. So they put a lot of money into it. Fiscally, it's going to be tougher to get out of, but what they're still lacking is still the increase in guards to keep everybody safe. Um, Asked about the cost of the whole, 2 weeks that he was out. What did it cost the public? And when I asked that of the county government, the only thing they would say that we covered our costs. We didn't have to put any extra money out. But I think what they really based that comment on, that they paid the overtime for the county detectives. The state police said it cost them $5.5 million in overtime, and they weren't reimbursed. And then you had all the local police, and you had the feeding of them, and the fire company that I mentioned said they have over $100,000 in unpaid expenses that they haven't recouped anything from. And it's the cost of keeping two helicopters and airplane up, 24 hours a day. That's really expensive. You had the FBI coming in, you had the Border Patrol, the marshals from all over the place. This was a really expensive uh, proposition to hunt this guy down. And several people have said, and nobody knows exactly, but they wouldn't. They think at least it's in a $20 million range
Wow.
for
Yeah.
for that, and that's not including the money that's now being allocated in tax dollars to upgrade the prison. So this whole thing has really affected the community in a lot of different ways.
So we'll end with one more story, and this is one of my favorites. That Yoda gives a gift to Jan.
Yes, the son of the murder victim.
Yeah. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, a lot of people and people in the Chester County Detective's Office and DA. I mean, the two kids, they were not forgotten. Their aunt is taking care of them, and of course the son became a big fan of Yoda, so they arranged to have an autograph photograph of Yoda given to the son, and again, it was just the community trying to help these two young kids, and it's just a very nice story.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool, and
Yeah,
you know, something I think would probably help that kid recover. I know that a lot of the community, I'm sure is still facing some PTSD from this happening, and especially living next to a prison, they probably view it in a different light now. Well, Bruce, thank you for coming on the show. I really enjoyed the book. It is A Killer at the Door. Again, you can get it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you can sell books. And if you'd like a signed copy, you can email Bruce. We'll put his information in the show description. Bruce, thanks again.
no, thank you for inviting me. It's a great show, and thank you for taking the time and talking to me about the book.
All right.